All right, we have 7. We can get started.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, we'll officially get started. Good afternoon. Welcome. So my name is Martine Watkins, and I am here on behalf of Sacramento State, and I will be our facilitator today for the meeting on AB 32, the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee meeting. And I want to take this moment to welcome you all on this Friday afternoon, and we really look forward to today's discussion. So start with order of business, we would like to cover some critical Zoom housekeeping since this meeting is exclusively being held remotely today. And these details will be pulled up on the screen as a reminder for a comment period as well. So next slide, please. So as mentioned, today's EJAC meeting is being fully remotely held via Zoom, and you will be able to raise your hand in Zoom to speak during the public comment period. When it's your turn, the host will ask you to unmute, and after you push the unmute button, you may begin to speak. We will be adhering to the 2-minute comment period limit, and if *6 does not work for you to unmute, CARB staff can also unmute you, and we appreciate you staying on mute until it is your time to speak and to be respectful for everybody's turn. If possible, please state your name and affiliation, if applicable, as well, so we know who is speaking. And now I'd like to turn it to our Spanish interpreters to please introduce themselves. Heidi, could you please provide these instructions in Spanish as you introduce yourself and your team?
Of course, thank you. Buenas tardes, estaremos interpretando de forma simultánea una servidora Heidi Aboites y mi colega Fabiola. Le pedimos que por favor siga las siguientes instrucciones. Como se mencionó en la reunión del día de hoy para EJAC, esta reunión es completamente remota. Usted podrá levantar la mano a través de Zoom para hablar durante los comentarios públicos. Cuando sea su turno, el anfitrión o anfitriona le prenderá el micrófono y le hará saber para que entonces usted pueda hablar. Nos vamos a adherir a un límite de 2 minutos para los comentarios de cada uno, y si en dado caso no prende su micrófono, le pedimos que ponga *6 para poder prender el micrófono. Si usted no lo puede hacer, el personal de CARB va a poder hacerlo por usted. Nosotros le agradecemos que se mantenga con el micrófono apagado hasta que sea su turno de compartir. También, cuando vaya a hablar, le pedimos que dé su nombre y su afiliación en caso que sea aplicable.
Great, thank you. Great, next slide. Okay, so we will provide instructions in English and Spanish. Oh, excuse me. Perfect, thank you. And then enable language interpretation features in the Zoom settings. So when the interpretation globe appears at the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen, as you will see in the visual on the screen in Visual 1, please choose your preferred language as English or Spanish, as seen in Visual 2. Heidi, can you please also provide these instructions in Spanish?
Of course, le vamos a proporcionar las instrucciones para acceder al canal de español e inglés para que pueda poder escuchar todo esto a través de Zoom. Cuando la interpretación esté activada, va a aparecer un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de mano derecha de su pantalla. Y como ustedes ven en este momento, en la figura número 1, usted puede seleccionar el lenguaje después de haber apretado el globo terráqueo y después asignará su lenguaje.
Thank you. All right, perfect. If for any reason that you feel that you will need some technical support via Zoom in today's meeting, please contact our CARB staff, Megan Caff, with the information here on the slide, and we will do our best to assist you. So as was mentioned, today's meeting is being recorded in Zoom, and CARB staff will be posting the recording to the EJAC Meetings and Events website in the coming weeks. This is the same website where you can find today's meeting materials as provided on this slide as well. I'll turn it over to you, Heidi, to also please provide these instructions in Spanish.
Thank you. Si por alguna razón usted requiere de apoyo técnico el día de hoy para la reunión, por favor contacte a algunos del personal de CARB. Se llama Megan Caff por correo electrónico y les proporcionarán también las diapositivas o ayudarle de mejor manera. La reunión de hoy será grabada y el personal de CARB va a poder poner esta grabación en los eventos en su sitio web en las siguientes semanas. En este mismo sitio web usted podrá encontrar todo el material que se proporcionó durante la presentación.
Thank you, Heidi. Okay, so with that, I'd like to begin the EJAC member roll call. So I will call your name and please state here or present. And if I mispronounce your name, please let me know. I want to make sure I can get that correct. So I'll start with Martha Dina Aguelo. Do you want to unmute and say here?
Yes.
Thank you. Juan Flores.
Present.
Angel Garcia.
Present.
Great. Dr. Catherine Garopa.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Catherine with Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, they and she pronouns.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Kevin Hamilton.
Here.
John Harriel Jr. Okay. Thomas Helm.
Hey everybody, Tom Helm, Valley Improvement Projects. Thank you.
You. Matt Holmes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matt Holmes, he, him pronouns, work on strategy with the California Environmental Justice Coalition out of Stockton, usually.
Thank you.
That's you all.
John Kevin Jefferson III.
Kevin Jefferson, present.
Mayor Ray Leon.
Present.
Excuse me, Luis Almedo. Okay. Jill Sherman Warren.
Present.
And Sharifa Taylor. I couldn't hear you, Sharifa, but I see you're here.
I'm present.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we do have a quorum and we can officially begin. So at this moment, I'd like to now turn it over to our co-chairs for introductions and opening remarks.
I was waiting for Catherine.
Can we go to the next slide? I'm not sure which is first, agenda or meeting agreements. Awesome. Yes, so good afternoon again, everyone. Dr. Catherine, EJAC co-chair. I volunteered to give a quick overview of our agenda today. And again, want to appreciate that we have the opportunity to do this meeting virtually. As much as I miss being with you all in person, grateful to be able to join virtually via Zoom and still get some of our important conversations and work done. So we just did introductions and we'll do opening remarks. We have some updates from CARB staff about some of the questions that came up at the last meeting, particularly around things like what the term limits are for EJAC members and when our appointment dates started. Kind of the core agenda item here coming from the Carbon Markets Work Group and building off of the robust and productive conversations we had at our September 14th joint meeting with the CARB board. We're going to continue our discussion of the low carbon fuel standard with a particular focus on carbon intensity scores and the models that are used to determine and model those. Then we will open it up for public comment. If we have time, we'll briefly discuss the 2024 EJAC meeting calendar and then wrap up with next steps and closing remarks.
Great, I can take on the meeting agreements, and I want to remind folks, these are really the meeting agreements for our EJAC members. I know there was some confusion last time about when we're talking about paying attention and equity of airtime, being present, being open and flexible with our approaches, being realistic and monitor our ability to get through the agenda. All of these really do apply to the EJAC members, not to the public. We are seeking, although we would love for them to engage this way as well. Seek out synergies in our work, yes, and building on each other, listening and be compassionate and supportive, reach for and invite inspiration and intuition, look for ways to move forward toward action when possible, and respect the agenda. So let's try to stay on topic and really, again, watch our, manage our own time. So how long we're speaking, because we all share responsibility for success for the work we're doing. And we have a lot to get through in a really short period of time. So next slide. Hand it over to Carb.
So before we jump into with carb updates, I just want to, hand it back to the co-chairs just in case if Keffer Jefferson would like to talk or would like to give an update or anything.
I don't have anything. Hello, all. Welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so now I can take it back and talk about the carb updates. Can you all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So the two updates I want to provide. One is on the membership, the term membership question that arose in the last meeting. So the term membership starts for EJAC, the ongoing EJAC starts from March of 2023 when the EJAC became permanent. Every member is supposed to finish their term for 36 months term starting from March 2023. I know, Tom, you had brought up this question, so just want to make sure that this is clear and that this is clear for everybody. The only thing that I want to highlight here for all the EJAC members ahead of time is that means that everybody's term is going to end at the same time. Mm-hmm. That means the solicitation efforts, we will have to start those solicitation efforts ahead of time so that we have those solicitation paperwork done and the process started and completed well in time for everybody to begin the next session, whenever that will be. Okay. And my second update that I want to give is on the SB 544, which I know we had talked about a little bit, which gives additional requirements for state bodies and the state advisory bodies on how to do meetings, in addition to the requirements that Bagley King already has. So for a state advisory body, which would be something like EJAC, starting in January 2024 till January of 2026, EJAC meetings can be remote. We don't have to have a physical quorum anymore. This bill gives us the authority to have the members join remotely. However, if the members are joining remotely, they have to keep their cameras on throughout the meeting. And for some reason, if they're not able to keep their cameras on, then they have to announce it during the meeting, letting folks know because of internet connectivity or whatever the reason is that they have to turn off their camera. 2, if there is anybody over the age of 18 that is also present in the room with them, then they have to announce that and also give a general relationship with that person. 3, we do not have to advertise those private remote locations for the public. However, as CARB staff, we will have to make one location as the teleconference location. And for our case, I'm just giving an example, maybe the Cali PA building, right? Our office building. We will have that meeting building available for public, and one staff, at least one staff should be available throughout the meeting so that if members of the public walk into the room, then they're able to participate in the meeting and also, participate in the public comment period during that time frame. So that is also one of the requirements that we have to we have to fulfill with. The 10-day notice requirement is not changing. That stays the same. However, 24 hours prior to the meeting, we have to update the names of the members, the EJAC members who are, who are attending remotely. We just have to put their names on the internet, on our website, on EJAC website, letting them know, such and such member attending the meeting remotely. We don't have to give the addresses. We don't have to do that. I think that is what I have. I'm just checking my list, small list here. So big thing is that if we wish, we can continue doing remote meetings. We have the authority to do that, but with the certain requirements that I just laid down. Any questions on either number 1 or number 2 item?
I see Dr. Catherine, her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Radhika, for that overview. On the second piece, in terms of the requirements for remote meetings, and apologies if I missed this, but just to clarify, is that in effect now or starting in 2024? And also just making explicit something you all are probably already planning to do, which is if we could just get a bullet point list of the things like that you have to have your camera on or you have to notify people, that would be helpful just to have a cheat sheet to keep track for those of us that do need to join remotely for future meetings. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is only an update on SB 544, which we had talked about in the previous meeting, right? So Governor already signed a bill that allows us to have remote meetings till the end of December. Starting January, we were waiting on SB 544 to go through. And since it approved, because approved now, it gets into effect January of 2024. And yes, I was planning to do a quick bullet points real quickly on SB 544 and then sending it over to the EJAC members. So point noted.
Thank you. We have another hand raised, and I see Sharifa has their hand raised, please.
Thanks, Martine. My question was actually a point of clarification. Radhika, could you repeat what you were saying about if you have somebody in the room who's over 18 point, could you repeat what you were saying about that?
Absolutely. So say if you have someone over the age of 18 in your room, maybe another staff person or another member of the public or whoever is attending this meeting with you, you just have to announce that you have someone and probably their name, and then you just have to give them, just state the relationship that, hey, I have members of the public here with me if they're testifying and you're helping them out, or if it's a coworker and they're just listening. And so you just have to explain the general relationships to them. That's
okay,
what states.
But say like you're like at your home or something, because we don't have to say our location, and say like you were like with your partner or whatever, you wouldn't have to say like, oh, my partner's here. You would have to say that, or you wouldn't.
So if they're in the room with you, it doesn't say in the house with you. So it says if there is 18 years or above in the room, you have to announce them.
Got it. So like say you're co-working, in that instance, you then have to say that they're there.
Yeah, if they're the way I read it in the law, it's if they're in the room, not in the house, like if they're anywhere else in the house, you don't have to announce them. But if someone is in the room over the age of 18, you just have to announce the general relationship with them, and you have to announce it that there is that person.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? Okay, I don't see any hands raised at this moment, so thank you so much for the update. I'd like to now pass it back to Dr. Catherine to introduce the LCFS item. And I'll just remind the public that we will take public comment after the LCFS item. If you are interested in addressing the EJAC members this afternoon, raise your hand now. Certainly we won't be able to get to you until after we're through the LCFS item, but we can at a certain point understand the queue, and we're anticipating about 2 minutes per person at this time. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, Martine. And again, want to really appreciate EJAC members and the Carbon Markets Work Group that helped us put together the resolution that we presented at the joint meeting with the CARB board on September 14th. Recognizing that the regulatory process for LCFS is ongoing and hasn't concluded yet, we wanted to take this opportunity to continue following up on inquiries that were raised during that meeting and in other conversations. And similar to our August meeting, in making the request for Industrial Strategies Division staff to present, they were unable to, but we do have staff available to answer questions and have sent them some initial draft questions that we'll put up on slides later, and then have opportunity to use those as a way of kicking off the discussion while also making space for other members to ask questions that may come up as we go along. So in the absence of being able to get a presentation and overview from staff, what we agreed to internally was providing a short 12-minute video that was presented at the September 28th CARB board meeting from a representative of Argonne Labs who developed the CA GREET model. And so this video will provide a basic overview of the model that, again, then will allow us to tee up having some discussion and some questions. Again, naming we want to continue this exploration and inquiry, and also this is a very complicated and far-reaching program with really serious implications for environmental justice communities. So realistically, we may not get through all of the questions today, and we may surface additional questions or items that we want to follow up on in November or at future meetings. So want to make space for that as well. So just to kind of reiterate, what we'll do next is we'll watch the 12-minute video, then we'll come back for discussion and questions. And the Carbon Markets Work Group did meet earlier today, along with drafting questions offline and sharing them with ISD staff in advance. So while we'll have some questions to start with, want to make space and have ample opportunity for others to ask questions as well. And with that, I'll pass it back to CARB to tee up the video and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Megan, if you could please go to the next slide and play the video, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the board for the opportunity for me to present an life cycle analysis and the GREET model. Michael Wong from Argonne National Laboratory. I am the Director of Systems Assessment Center at the Interim Division Director of Systems Assessment at Infrastructure Analysis. I am the original GREET development in 1995, and continue to lead the Argonne GREET development effort. Next. So here, these slides are summarized trend of life cycle analysis, all simply called LCA. So LCA holistically evaluate sustainability of technologies and policies. So it is a move from a signal stage to a complete supply chain. So the shift in environment burdens from one stage to another is not going to be missed. LCA thinking has helped changes in cooperation and consumer behaviors, and many of us can relate when we buy the specific consumer products, we are paying attention these days on the environment footprint, how the products produced. Recent trend of transportation LCA applications in the domestic area, we already are very familiar with California LCFS and the similar programs in several other states such as Oregon and Washington State, and EPA's RFS. And as the previous speaker already referred, the Inflation Reduction Act incentives for clean hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, and clean fuels are based on LCA greenhouse gas emissions result. On the international front, there are several significant programs. the International Civil Aviation Organization's COSIA program for SAF's carbon intensity is based on LCA. The International Marine Organization's the current discussion on potential low GHG standards and with the LCA-based result. As many of us know, the EU RED, Canadian Clean Fuel Standard, Brazilian Renewable Power Program, all based on LCA result. Next. So here I put life cycle analysis into two perspectives. The life cycle analysis for technologies. This is to examine the environmental footprint of technologies, such as different fuel production technologies by including the fuel cycle, or in the transportation area, the vehicle cycle, such as battery manufacture, or the facility cycle, such as building the power plant, building solar PV, or wind turbine, and so on. So this is to examine the environmental footprint of specific technologies. On the other hand, on the corporate front, we know now there are some voluntary and regulatory or legal requirement for corporations to report supply chain environmental footprint, such as scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, and the recent law adopted in California required corporations to report their 3 scope emissions. So this is a supply chain for cooperation. So in a way, it addresses LCA, but from company's point of view. And historically, LCA has been addressing environment footprint from technology's point of view. So two kind of intertwine each other. And the LCA capability CARB already established from LCFS, I see tremendous value to help the new law for our corporation supply chain emissions, the so-called 3 scope emissions. Next. This is a quick summary of the GREAT model as we developed at Argonne National Laboratory under the U.S. Department of Energy. So the first release was in 1995. Since then, we have annual update and expansion. Our 2023 release is scheduled for mid-October. So in 2 weeks, we'll have for GREAT 2023. The model is in public domain, as you see, and the GREAT website. The GREAT sponsors historically were from DOE, different offices in the Department of Energy. Here you see the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, ARPA-E Program, Office of Technology Transitions, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office, and Nuclear Energy Offices. Besides DOE, we have other federal agencies in recent years provide some support for GREAT development. FAA for SAF, Federal Marine Administration, or MERAD for our marine fuels, LCA, and Federal Rail Administration for our rail decarbonization effort. And we also had support from USDA and NIST of the Department of Commerce. Next. This slide summarizes the GREAT user base. Of course, as we all know, California has been the significant GREAT user by developing CA GREAT. But worldwide, we have more than 55,000 registered GREAT users. And you see, over 60% of users are indeed in North America. But we do have extensive global user base. And of course, the academic institutions use grid for research, and agencies use grid for regulation and policy development, such as CARB. And International Civil Aviation Organization, we were part of the COSIA program, so we've been using grid to develop safe carbon intensity for ICAO's COSIA program. Next. As many of us know, in the LC field, LC in general, grid in particular, is very data intensive, so data are the key. So here, as you see, I summarize data into two groups, the so-called background data versus foreground data. Background data, of course, we rely on government agencies' statistics, such as Energy Information Administration's annual databases update, the EPA's annual data update at USDA, at USGS, and so on. So for data, the verification is key. So what you put into LCM modeling needs to be verified. And CARB's presentation elaborate the significance of verification as to certify verifiers to make sure the data gets into the CI calculations accurately reflect the operation. And of course, data from different sources, primary data versus secondary data. Primary data are the data from facility operations. So over the last more than 10 years, LCFS program collect a tremendous amount of primary data from individual facilities. So this helped the LCFS program to have reliable data to develop the CI values and to help the LC field with more data. And there we can have reliable LC models and LC results. Next. So here is an example of the system boundaries for life cycle analysis. So here is the biofuel as the example. So the key stages of biofuel LC is fertilizer production, farming activities, including all the input, fertilizer input, diesel fuel input, and crop yield, etc. They, of course, biofuel conversion is significant stage. And as the CARB steps presentation already elaborate, the LC system boundary include direct and indirect land use changes in biofuel LC. Next. This chart shows you your electricity LC. So as we all know, electricity is generated from different primary energy sources called natural gas, uranium for nuclear power plant, geothermal plant, hydro, solar, wind, and so on. So each of the energy feedstocks has its own supply chain, and that can be a part of grid and part of the LC in general. And then during the conversion, of course, facility itself sometimes part of the LC system boundary. Earlier I mentioned the construction of power plant, the production of solar PV, production of wind turbine. So this could be the within the LC system boundary. Grid is configured to include everything you see on this slide. But the so-called facility cycle LC is optional, so people can turn this off and on inside of grid. And in fact, in many LC studies, this is somewhat optional because this is a one-time emission rather than the annual emission when you operate facilities. Next. So this is a quick run of LC history, application, and grid development. So thank you again for the opportunity.
And I think that concludes the video. So thank you for getting that set up for us. I would now like to turn it back to the co-chairs for EJAC questions and discussion. Oh, excuse me, Radhika.
Just before that, I mean, I did notice the request for closed captioning to be turned on. Our staff was furiously trying to make it happen, but unfortunately we couldn't do it. Here's what we can do. Once we get the transcript from the board meeting, we're gonna definitely take the transcript and share it with EJAC as well. So that you can clear, that will be another way to follow the video.
Thank you for addressing that.
Yes, thank you, Radhika. Again, definitely a lot of technical details to cover. So our goal is to get a better understanding of the life cycle analysis that is going into the low carbon fuel standard. And as I had mentioned in the introduction to this item, this was an initial draft set of questions that the Carbon Markets Work Group put together. So at this point, I think we can actually stop the screen share because these were kind of a springboard that we will touch on, but not necessarily in this order. This time is really meant to be more of a discussion between EJAC members and the CARB staff that are here to answer questions. So before I start passing it around to the work group members, and of course, again, welcome and open it up to all EJAC members, if the ISD staff who are here to answer questions maybe just want to introduce themselves, and then we can start. And if we could take the slides down, so it'll make it easier for us to see each other. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Anil Prabhu. I've been part of the low carbon fuel standard life cycle since the inception, way back in 2006, 2007, when we were officially getting together. So I have one of my staff who retired a couple of months ago. So I'm the longest tenured life cycle specialist on the LCFS program at CARB. And thank you for inviting me to this meeting.
Welcome, Anil, and thank you for joining us. Are you the only one? I just don't want to cut off anybody else's introduction.
I am the manager for the life cycle. So if there is something else that is not directly under my purview, I will, there's a couple more people who are joining, but not necessarily required to provide sort of that discussion topic or responses.
Okay, totally makes sense. And again, recognizing if there are questions we can't get answered today, we can note those down and follow up on them in the future. So I definitely have comments and questions, but to open it up, wanted to first pass it to Tom Helm to ask some of the initial questions about how CA GREET and CI scores work. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so one of the questions that was on that list a minute ago, we got explanation of the GREET model. I understand there's other tools that go into determining the CI score. So I'm looking for a real high level explanation of all the tools used in going into the CI score, how they interact, the different models interact at the most basic level that it can be explained so that someone like me can understand.
Okay. I'll try to do my best, and it'll be an iterative process, so feel free to ask me questions after I finish up my initial sort of that description. What the low carbon fuel standard essentially looks for is the life cycle well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions quantification. So by that, I mean you're actually producing the fuel and you're using the fuel in a combustion or other sort of mechanism to actually get the propulsion. So there's two pieces in there, and the life cycle analysis in the low carbon fuel standard addresses both parts as well, the well to tank and then the tank to wheel. The CA GREET, which is essentially a modified version of the Argonne GREET model, serves sort of the primary tool to provide all the necessary inputs, both for the emission factors that are used for the life cycle calculations, as well as some of the embedded life cycle methodologies. And I will sort of walk through, it's just sort of a simple example of what I mean by emission factors. And please correct me if everybody here has enough of that experience and I'm just adding additional burden. So essentially, when you have tailpipe combustion. So you're taking a fuel and combusting it. So for every unit of fuel, whether it's a gallon or some other unit of fuel, when you're combusting that, there is an emission factor associated, which tells you how much greenhouse gas emissions are produced for every mile of transport or every gallon of fuel that is used. So that is the emissions that are calculated. The emission factors in this case come from the MFAC, which is the CARB repository for emission factors. So when I transition from GREET to CA GREET, we take the basic model from Argonne and add a California flavor to it. The California flavor is sort of the electricity emissions, which are unique to California. We have tailpipe emissions that are unique to California, and the fuel formulations that are unique to California. So there are some minor modifications to the Argonne model, but the Argonne model is the primary repository of emission factors and the life cycle methodologies that are used in the life cycle. So I'll give a simple example with corn ethanol. So when we're dealing with corn ethanol, we're looking at producing the corn, harvesting the corn, transporting the corn, converting, or in this principle, fermenting the corn to produce ethanol, and the ethanol is then transported to California if it is not produced in California, and then used in combustion with gasoline, the non-ethanol part of gasoline. What we do in the life cycle is, Michael Wong here talked about a background and a foreground. So this is a clear example of a background and a foreground. The background emissions in the Argonne model come from USDA and some of the other sources that look at the average emissions, greenhouse gas emissions attributable to producing the corn. Once the corn is produced, that corn is now transported to an ethanol production facility. In the low carbon fuel standard, we actually look at that foreground data, which is essentially the emissions attributable at the facility that produces corn to ethanol, transforms corn to ethanol. So we look at the natural gas use, the electricity use, and any other energy source that is used to produce ethanol from corn. The ethanol is then transported by, whether it's by rail or by truck, all the way to California, and then used in internal combustion engines. So essentially the accounting in this specific example uses the background from the Argonne, and then some foreground, which is basically facility, as well as the CA flavor after that fuel reaches California. I hope I've given a 30 or 50,000 foot level perspective with an example. Feel free to go, ask me more questions about the general life cycle approach used in the low carbon fuel standard.
Yeah, go ahead, Martha Dina.
So when you say the inputs for the corn production, does that include everything? Like the pesticides that are used, the water that is used, if it's Roundup Ready, what are the impacts of driving more use of Roundup Ready corn seed? So, and then does it also include
Martha, what we look for is primarily in the low carbon fuel standard is a life cycle greenhouse gas emission. Yes, production, the Argonne model, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the Argonne model takes into account the emissions attributable to producing the fertilizer or the pesticide, transporting that fertilizer or pesticide to the individual farm, and using that pesticide and or fertilizer and associated emissions from N2 or whatever the other emissions that are attributable to the use of that fertilizer at the corn production plant. So that is what is embedded. And the USDA produces statistics on the average use of some of these inputs into farming for corn, and that is accounted in our life cycle emissions.
But it's still just GHGs, right? Not, let's say, toxic air contaminants or water contaminants. It's just GHGs.
Technically, for the purposes of the Argonne GREET, it is mostly to do with greenhouse gas emission.
Okay.
Thanks, Martha Dina. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I really appreciate all of this high levels and helping answer some of these questions that are outside of what it's nice to know that people have done some of the background on the many inputs into how we get these carbon intensity scores. I kind of want to turn towards dairies real quick because it's been a hot topic throughout this whole EJAC process, and have had the opportunity to walk through some of these places, and setting aside the whole enteric emissions from burps and farts and whatnot. Once we've captured how does GREET account for the greenhouse gas emissions that that come with the digestate, once we've soaked it all in water and we, they capture the methane under the tents, right? But then we have all the digestate that we're storing it and we're piping it around the dairy, and then we're eventually spreading this wet fluid out on the landscape. And we have, some questions in our National Working Lands recommendations about the wet application of, digested manure. Does GREET account for those sort of after digestion captured greenhouse gas emissions?
Matt, let me first start with the approach to the pathway, right? I don't know if everybody is familiar with the way we account for the dairy, sort of the life cycle analysis. So once the manure, this is basically manure collection and management is included. So if you have equipment that is used to basically put all that manure together in a digester or a lagoon, those emissions are currently included in our life cycle analysis. And then you digest in it's either in a lagoon or a digester. You're converting some of the organic into methane. You have methane capture, and you upgrade that methane, essentially taking off the undesirable and creating renewable natural gas, which is then injected into a local pipeline.
Right.
We account for all the emissions, including any of the fugitives. And now let's look at the specific question you had here about emissions from digestate management are included in the life cycle analysis for the dairy swine manure pathways. Now, with respect to how this is exactly accounted for, is the liquid portion is applied to fields irregularly, just like lagoons, right? So this is sort of that baseline where you're looking for, in the absence of the LCFS, some of these would be applied to fields regularly, just like lagoons. So the digestate management rate is included because it's part of basically recovering some of that digestate after the lagoon and or digester process is complete. But once it's applied to the landfill, it is, to land application, the emissions are really in sort of the baseline case, right? So in the absence that, they would have to be applied anyway. So we're basically accounting for a system boundary that includes collection of the manure and getting to the RNG, and then taking care of that digestate outside the system boundary. But all the emissions embedded within that process are accounted for in our life cycle analysis.
But a baseline application would have been a dry manure, and this is all wet and churned up and has way more fermented methane emissions than if it had just been scattered dry. So do we account for that? I mean, we're weaponizing this stuff by keeping it wet, churning it up, and spreading it around, and making it harder for it to dry out and stabilize its methane. So you get your ammonia spike and your methane spike from that treatment.
In our program, farms with a dry baseline are not eligible, and these must have a lagoon.
Okay.
So anyone that has a dry baseline for manure that are not actually using water or other things to basically put that into a lagoon are not eligible for a dairy, swine, and or dairy renewable natural gas pathway.
Okay. So for those that do have a lagoon, can you give us an idea where in that modeling we capture the nitrogen increases from this process? Because ammonium nitrate and the secondary reaction with Starlight and PM 2.5 in the Central Valley is a major problem. That's why CARB state implementation plan got rejected. So my concern is that there's this secondary particulate matter formation from the ammonium nitrate that's only at this high level because we're using the low carbon fuel standard to wet and disperse all this manure more than it ever would have been on its own.
The cap and trade, I mean, if you look back at the original framing of the dairy pathway in the low carbon fuel standard, it refers to the cap and trade offsets. So the offsets essentially addresses some of what you brought up here with respect to the other non-methane components of that dairy swine manure dairy pathway.
Yeah. but just for the record, those offsets don't capture the respiratory irritant or the overburdening of the PM in the air column. I don't know. I still see a really weird privileging of dairy operations in California, and it looks like CARB is inventing pollution to pretend to catch it. But thank you, Anil, for that background.
Thanks, Matt. And I know, Tom, you also still have a question that we'll come back to, but while we're on the line about confined animal feeding operations or CAFOs, and more specifically in the San Joaquin Valley mega dairies, first, just want to clarify, building off of the presentation in the video that we just watched, that it's part of why it's important to understand all of these technical nuances. So to be clear, the presenter talks about the system boundary and that is where the well-to-wheel life cycle analysis happens. And of course, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but with mega dairies, just want to be clear that the system boundary is considered the dairy digester itself. So it's not including the emissions from the cows themselves, the farts and burps, as Matt mentioned, or the feed or the truck trips to and from the dairy. So there are a lot of emissions, both in terms of greenhouse gases and air pollutants. And also to name that in 2022, CARB's own analysis of SB 1383 showed that there are significant data gaps when it comes to emissions from dairies. So when we're talking about ensuring that there's robust primary data in the model, dairies are an outlier, right? We don't have enough information by CARB's own acknowledgement. And so it's definitely an area that not only needs additional attention in terms of data, but to reiterate one of our asks from our resolution conversation, dairies need direct regulation. So along those lines, I wanted to understand a bit better about how CARB determines baseline methane emissions from dairy and livestock operations in your analysis of avoided methane emissions as part of the carbon intensity calculations. And just hearing myself say that, I can follow because I prepared this question in advance, but it also sounds like a lot of jargon. So just to give a specific example, to put a finer point on this, for example, if a dairy installed a digester in 2004 under another program and then applied for credits in 2018, what are their baseline methane emissions? Again, acknowledging that we're only talking about the digester itself and not the rest of the dairy.
So can you repeat that last part, Catherine?
Yeah, so if a dairy installed a digester in 2004 and then applies for credits in 2018, what are the baseline methane emissions for methane from the digester? So, or for methane from the manure rather. So is the baseline calculated from before they installed the digester or after, even though we're talking about a difference between 2004 and 2018?
The baseline is prior to digester installation.
Yeah, and so for me, logically, that just doesn't make sense. So what is the justification for why if they're applying in 2018, then why wouldn't their baseline methane emissions be inclusive of the digester? Because it's already been there for 14 years.
We're just trying to establish consistency across all the low carbon fuel standard pathways. So we cannot specifically carve out one for dairy and say this was existing. So the approach, we're basically trying to be consistent across all the, we have other waste-based pathways for UCO. We have landfills. And if you'll start to look back at some of the landfills are required to be regulated. So the approach is on some of the avoidance in the landfill space is not, but a landfill that previously had or did not have a capture collection device is assumed to have a capture collection device in terms of assessing what the baseline emissions were. So it's just trying to be consistent across the program for all the fuel pathways is why we have continued to look at it from that perspective and not look for something what you're calling out here.
Got it. So again, I'll just underscore, I think there are definitely some troubling assumptions and calculations that are having an adverse impact in the Valley in terms of dairy and methane and other emissions. And with that, I'll pass it to Kevin, and again, express a lot of gratitude, Kevin, for helping us generate some of the questions that we sent to staff in advance. So Kevin, take it away.
There we go. Fighting with the phone. Thank you. And by the way, thank you for that fantastic presentation, Dr. Wang, and the gentleman who just spoke, who's senior on this group. I think, Catherine, you nailed it when you said troubling. So there was an assumption made that for some reason we needed to have this conformity across the system that you just talked about, sir. And in order to have that conformity, you, in my mind, fudge the data a bit so that certain groups would get the benefit of that fudging by not applying the rigor to all of them that we would normally think of, at least on the medical science side, as being absolutely critical. If you've got these outliers that have a different background, different scenario, different indicators, then you have to take that into account. And you have to be able to demonstrate, well, what about them? And because the volume of them is so high, the impact is high as well. And the impact in this case is the increased amount of methane emissions that people are getting credit for that, quite honestly, they haven't earned. And the other side of this coin sort of sits short-lived climate pollutants like black carbon. And you had mentioned everything, including what it takes to move the manure from the, I'm assuming, the dairy areas that it lands, free-stalls and such, and the milking parlors, down to the lagoons. So that's generally done with big icy engines, usually diesel. And obviously a lot of black carbon involved there. So there would be definitely a question, and of course, oxides of nitrogen. So all big time climate forces. So we need to understand that are those captured as well and considered in the overall equation. And then, well, let me let you answer that first, and I have one more thing, and I will drop. Could you answer that for me?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, thanks for that. And, this is my first time with the group. I'll try to do my best.
You're doing great, man. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want to underplay that. How much we appreciate it.
Yeah. Anyway, few things on the issue of black carbon. First and foremost, there is not really an inventory that our AB 32 or any of the other programs account for the use of black carbon in the CARB programs, especially definitely in the low carbon fuel standard. So this would be something that we would have to consider for the future.
I would think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
If you look at the science around the black carbon, there is a mixed picture that some warming is attributed to black carbon, but also some cooling impacts. So if you're looking at definitely the greenhouse gas impact, we have to look for both and consider them when there is some sort of a scientific sort of convergence around the net impact of black carbon. And
we're coming back to the data gaps, right? Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, we are always open to you folks or anybody in the scientific community or anybody in the data space that has some actual, both the greenhouse gas impact and of course the quantification of some of these. That is really, really beneficial. And we encourage you to, sort of have some of that discussions around how black carbon can fit into the space of life cycle and greenhouse gas and global, impacts on warming. But definitely from a
it's the same with NOx then? Is that what you're saying with oxides of nitrogen? It's the same with NO?
Well,
it's not
technically,
counted.
I mean, there's two pieces in there. First, we look at the greenhouse gas impact. So if there is N2O emissions, they are accounted for in the greenhouse gas accounting. We definitely are looking for transition away from what we call the primary, the combustion vehicles. So the expectation is in the next couple of decades, we'll basically move away from what are the combustion vehicles to non-combustion vehicles. So there is that ongoing evolution in the California space of moving away from potential sources of, what you're bringing up here. And I know other stuff that, has always been at the forefront of California and CARB in particular to get to really, really good air quality for its citizens.
All right, this is more with regard to stationary sources and climate forces, greenhouse gas emissions. In the short-lived climate pollutant category, which of course methane sits in as well. So if you're going to do one, they should all be included. At least we believe that. And so the other thing that I am curious about, at some point in time, somebody made a decision, and I'll use your corn example because I think it's really apt, that we would do this, which was a good decision at that time. However, could we anticipate the shift in that industry and how that shift would move more toward production of a product that is more amenable to use in this category, and therefore changing the landscape essentially in those regions, in the four state regions where the majority of this ethanol focused corn is grown. That has massively increased, and the way corn is grown, how it's fertilized, how it's harvested has grown with that. It was never at that level when they were growing corn for food, whether it's for animals or for people. So how does the formula kind of look back at the sort of the as is in that back in 2006 and what the shifts have been moving forward in the background data that you're getting from, say, USDA? And is it sensitive enough to detect those changes in the emission profiles of those activities, especially, again, related to greenhouse gases? If that makes sense.
Yes, Kevin, if you're looking at the crop production, the USDA does a survey annually or every other year. And it's sort of a little bit of a mixed picture there because, yes, farmers are getting, more educated and more, economically sensitive to the inputs that go into corn production and the value they get for their product. So definitely at the farm level, they're getting more creative. On a regular basis, I get inquiries from these corn producers that they want to get much lower carbon corn into the low carbon fuel standard. And we are sort of encouraging them to just be sort of a region or country-wide approach as opposed to an individual farm, because individual farm would be very hard for us to track. So the general tendency has been, at least definitely in the US on corn in particular, but some of the other crops as well, is to get to much lower impacts to produce either higher yielding corn or definitely corn with much lower agricultural inputs. And if you look at the USDA, just about a couple of months ago, has invested millions of dollars into what they call climate smart agriculture to definitely get into the agriculture also being in the space of limiting climate impacts from agriculture. So the end effect as we move forward will be all these crops, not necessarily for fuels, because if you look at the trajectory we have as an agency, that we're basically moving more of electrification than having the ethanol/gasoline fuel used in light duty vehicles. So there's that multi-factored approach into lowering the use of some of what you bring up here, but separately, corn and other feedstocks that are being produced are getting into sort of that lowering the greenhouse gas emissions from the production of these feedstocks.
This is new money, and yeah, I do track the USDA. My wife to do that, and I saw the grants coming out, and farmers.
Kevin, you're breaking up a little bit. It's a little bit hard to hear you.
Yeah, and I think we have another question in the queue.
You probably heard the 4-year-old screaming in the car, I would imagine, a few minutes ago. and laughing. So anyway, I just don't see who chose to not use the entire dairy's emissions and at least model that in comparison to not modeling it. So we have at least the ability to look at the background in which this activity is taking place. This was very narrowly placed with a systems boundary, as Catherine pointed out, that it's critical to understand that this decision was made to place this boundary here. And without that, so we know what's going on one side of it, but we're not accounting for what's going on the other side of it. And quite honestly, that just doesn't make sense to most people. It certainly works for the people who are participating in that program in the money side, but we really need that comparison. And I think policymakers who are making these decisions and the public are entitled to that information. And it sounds like it could be done, but it just hasn't been. Again,
thanks for that
please correct me.
suggestion, Kevin. And
Yeah.
we'll look forward to more of that input from you. But let me go back to sort of that consistency across the fuel pathways.
Sure.
We basically look at it
And
say
I won't ask any more questions now.
Sure. Okay. And if you're looking for farm and milk life cycle, that is available in open literature, but in the LCFS, we're focused more on the system boundary related to producing a fuel from waste. And I think we've done our best to include that within the system boundary, inclusive of any methane losses or fugitives or everything else that's embedded within that system boundary.
Thank you, Kevin, for underscoring those points. And as much as I can appreciate from a technical perspective, consistency, again, just want to bring home the fact that the reality on the ground in frontline communities is that this is having a very adverse impact on people living near dairies that continue to expand because of the outsized incentives that they're receiving. And again, acknowledging we have a lot of questions related to this because there are a lot of technical details. I want to encourage EJAC members to raise your hands and get in the queue if you have questions. Right now, I want to turn back to a question that Martha Dina dropped in the chat. Martha Dina, I don't know if you want to go ahead and read that out so that we're all on the same page.
Sure. How does CARB account for the methane emission reductions that have already been accounted for through other programs, investments, and obligations when setting carbon intensity for a specific pathway?
Martha, it wasn't very clear. Let me get closer to my laptop. Maybe, I don't know if it's just not coming across.
Let me try again.
Please.
So how does CARB account for the methane emissions reductions that have already been accounted for through other programs, investments, or obligations when setting carbon intensities for specific pathways?
Are you talking specifically about maybe another grant or something that is embedded within the construction of a project and how that plays into potentially the LCFS producing some crediting for the biomethane that is generated or renewable natural gas that's generated from that project, which received some of the benefits?
Yes, I think that's what I'm asking.
Okay. One second. So thanks for that question, Martha. Generally speaking, we look at it from the perspective of that the LCFS benefits. Again, let me give you two separate examples. Before the dairy pathways were in the low carbon fuel standard, some of the methane was included in the carbon offsets in the cap and trade program. And when you're looking at that same unit of methane, we do not permit them to get the benefits from the cap and trade and the LCFS. You can select one or the other. So we were very explicit when we drafted up the requirements of low carbon fuel standard that you're not eligible for double counting of those methane offsets, either in the cap and trade program and the low carbon fuel standard. So I hope that's clear with respect to the double counting of the methane in between the LCFS and cap and trade. with respect to the additional benefits that accrue, incentives or something, they can, be additive in the sense if there are some DDRF grants or some of the other ones that are benefiting the construction of the digester that are different because they're not specifically counting some of the methane benefits that are directly accruable to the low carbon fuel standard. So I hope I was able to get that across, but we prevent sort of that double counting around it, but you have financial incentives. We don't limit. There's more than the LCFS that goes into actually building some of these facilities to basically, again, we're focusing here on dairy. We're just trying to be consistent across all pathways. So if there are other federal incentives, just like, we permit the federal RIN program in the RFS2 at the EPA level, they get some of that double stacking from the use of that renewable natural gas, and we permit that. So in certain areas, just to be consistent, we're permitting it. But in areas where it's specifically to California with the methane avoidance, we will not permit them to get dual benefits. I hope I was reasonably clear. If not, let me know and I'll try to, give another shot at trying to clear that up.
Thanks.
Thank you, Martha, Dina, and Anil. So I do have one other question, clarifying question about dairy specifically. And again, want to encourage EJAC members, if you similarly have questions specifically about confined animal feeding operations and methane emissions, etc., please get in the queue and raise your hand. Otherwise, from the work group, I know, Tom, you still also have one other question. So when I'm done, I will come back to you unless somebody else raises their hand. So what percentage of California dairies use flush manure management systems, and what percentage of US dairies use flush manure management systems?
From what I gather is it is a majority. Let me just try and see if I can, I don't know if I have the absolute numbers, but we'll have to follow up with you on sort of that percentage.
Okay.
But I know it's a majority.
Okay. So yes, that is something that we can follow up with offline. I'll just say that not all dairies use flush manure management systems, and converting from dry to wet manure is done in order to install a digester and benefit from credits. So, want to call out again where we're incentivizing this type of practice. So flush systems historically haven't traditionally been used. This is more of a newer development at dairies. And among many other things, many other impacts, it's not a good use of water. Sorry, Sharifa, did you say you had your hand raised in the chat? I wasn't able to track while I was talking.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. So that's related to something else. Totally disregard that. So last call for any questions folks have about dairies and emissions from dairies. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I just have one quick statement, which is that every gallon that doesn't make it to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta doesn't flush out that delta, turns tule grass, a carbon sequestering species, into an emitter, and I don't see that showing up in any of these models. Every time we divert water from the San Joaquin River, not a drop of which makes it to the delta, we break our largest, most free, most infallible carbon sequestration infrastructure, which is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. It's bad math.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sorry. Anil, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you for tying that together. And I know there are important considerations there as well on natural and working lands. So with that, again, EJAC members, if you have questions, now's the time to raise your hand and ask them. I'm going to turn to Tom for your last overarching question we had on the list that we prepared as a work group.
Sure, and another thought about dairies and the water, more groundwater that's contaminated with nitrates increases demand for surface water, which increases demand for reservoir construction and other kind of, I guess, ecosystem disruption that might also naturally sequester carbon. Not an expert on that, but just kind of came to my mind. It seems like that's another pathway that will go down if we continue to increased contamination of different water sources. But yeah, it was kind of a follow-up to my original question, and I was trying to do a little research on my own, but we're talking about, it keeps coming up about, is this including everything, kind of the upstream, downstream emissions? So I saw the terms, scope 1, 2, and 3, and I'm gaining a little bit of an understanding about how basically scope 2 and scope 3, our emissions are indirect. But I'm still curious about to differentiate scope 2 and scope 3, what the difference is and how that affects this whole analysis. And I know that's another big complicated question that I'm just trying to wrap my head around, looking for a semi-simple answer again.
Did we lose Anil? I don't see him anymore.
Yes, I think we did lose Anil. So I'll look into try to get him connected back.
All right. So during this pause, well, hopefully Anil will be able to rejoin and help us understand exactly what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are. Again, just want to ask if other EJAC members have questions. Please raise your hand and get into the queue. Once we wrap this discussion, or again, agree to come back to it, which we can also decide later, we will go to public comment. So it's been, appreciate CARB staff also dropping in the chat, but if you haven't already and you're a member of the public and you want to speak, please raise your hand so that you can get into the queue.
So Anil had dropped off. I just promoted him to be a panelist, so he should be joining us shortly.
Thanks for the update, Johnny.
You're welcome.
Hey, sorry, everybody, I'm back.
Thank you, Anil. No worries. I'm not sure at what point you dropped, but essentially Tom's question was if you could define scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did hear the question.
Great.
Specifically, we have different accounting systems, annual versus LCA, and it includes all indirect and direct emissions. So I don't know if we can directly translate some of this to scope 1, 2, 3, because for us, we look at it as an embedded, a complete life cycle, and not attributable to one piece under scope 1 or scope 2 or scope 3. I probably need to think this a little more carefully before I provide, but a company or an entity would essentially look for attributing certain parts that they can control under scope 1, or potentially something that is attributable to a different perspective on scope 3. But let's say there's a company like Mars that is making chocolates, and they may determine what part of that gets into the scope 1 for producing the chocolate, and what part of that comes from the scope 3. So I can't give you a definitive one right now without thinking a little more carefully about where it would be attributable. But in the LTA, we calculate the entirety of that renewable natural gas from the manure, and this is your carbon intensity. Where that is essentially carved out into different pieces, I can't really give you an answer right at this minute, but I'm sure we can. I can look at this more carefully and come back maybe the next time we talk.
Okay. Thank you, Anil, and thank you, Tom, for the question. I also noticed in the Argonne Labs presentation that he mentioned scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and wanted to be clear myself on exactly what those entailed. So I think at this point, we're at last call for any questions or comments that EJAC members want to make. And otherwise, I will pass it back to Martine to take us to the public comment period. Again, acknowledging that this is an ongoing inquiry, and I will convene the carbon markets work group and will make a request for further information, follow up on offline questions, and potentially request future EJAC agenda items. So really, again, want to appreciate work group members and EJAC members, and we added an extra person or two for the conversation for our work group today. So really appreciate all of the background work that went into this. Martine, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Catherine. So at this time, as was mentioned, this is our opportunity for public comment, and we'd like to hear your public comment, your questions or comments via Zoom. As mentioned, today is a shorter meeting, so we'll allocate 2 minutes per person, and we ask if possible to state your name and affiliation and to be as succinct as possible. And I'll hand it over to Ashley to help us understand who's in our queue.
Great. Thank you, Martine. We do have 4 attendees that have comments today. So we're going to start with Dallas Gerber. Dallas, your line has been unmuted and you can begin to speak.
Hi, my name is Dallas Gerber with Growth Energy, the nation's largest ethanol association, representing 93 biofuel producers that produce 9 billion gallons of cleaner burning renewable fuel annually, and more than 100 businesses associated with the production process. As the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee reviews CARB's potential changes to the LCFS, I respectfully urge the committee members to consider the positive impact biofuels in general and bioethanol in particular has made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, decrease fossil fuel use, and help communities that disproportionately experience the effects of vehicle emissions. Growth Energy has previously submitted extensive comments to CARB demonstrating the vital role low-carbon biofuels and higher blends of biofuels can play in meeting California's ambitious climate goals. Recent data from the Transportation Energy Institute shows biofuels have been the largest contributor to greenhouse gas reductions since the implementation of the LCFS. The approval of higher blends of ethanol in fuel for the state's road transportation fleet can contribute even more to greenhouse gas reductions. E15 approved by the US EPA for use in passenger vehicles model 2001 and newer can immediately be deployed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, research conducted by UC Riverside and University of Illinois has shown E15 to reduce harmful particulates and air toxics. CARB recently recognized innovations in the ethanol industry with changes to the CATS modeling, factoring in carbon sequestration and its impact on ethanol's carbon intensity score, dropping it from 66 to 35. Additional consideration of low-carbon farm practices confirmed further deepen biofuels' greenhouse gas reductions. Adjustments to the LCFS and emissions reduction targets are eventually adopted, the approval of E15 can be a vital contributor to achieving those targets. A simple switch to E15 statewide would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1.8 million tons, the equivalent of taking more than 400,000 cars off of California's highways each year. It would benefit environmental justice communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution, as research shows that higher ethanol content in gasoline decreases hazardous air pollutants and fine particulate matter. Growth Energy looks forward to continuing to work with CARB and EJAC on the revisions to the LCFS and ensure the role biofuels will play in making California's fuel mix more sustainable and help the state achieve its climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dallas. Your timing's impeccable. Next on the queue is Steve Rosenblum. Steve, we've now unmuted your line and you begin to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. Yeah, I'd like to start with some of the questions that were raised by the panel, particularly about dairy methane and biomethane. To me, it's an industrial waste product. It's not a natural resource, and we don't pay industries to clean up their industrial waste. We require them to do that as part of the cost of doing business. And as the committee has pointed out, you have toxic air contamination and odors that affect the local community. The basic mistake that the GREET model makes with the dairy methane is that they give them a huge avoided emission credit of minus 300 grams carbon dioxide equivalent per megajoule. So gasoline, for example, is plus 100. So they already start out with a huge negative number, and it basically allows them to put that number into a model and come out with a bad conclusion. And anyone will tell you that if you put bad data into a model, you get bad data out of it. It was also alluded that dry scrape is a better solution. It does not produce methane, and it's what's used in Europe extensively, and has only become popular in the US as the result of the biomethane credits. And this has led to an out-of-state manure gold rush. I see tier 2 applications from all over the country, from Wisconsin, from Idaho, from New York, wanting tier 2 credits for facilities that have been already creating methane for decades and putting it into pipelines, and they're just taking advantage of the LCFS to add a little bit more to their bottom line. So I'd like to urge the EJAC to continue with their efforts that they so ably started at the September 14th joint meeting with the CARB board, where Michael Wara presented his ideas about how we could improve the LCFS, and the EJAC presented its 8 points program, which I think are extremely useful and should be a guideline for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next in queue is Michael Bocadoro. Michael, we've unmuted your line and you can begin to speak.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
You sound great.
Great. I just wanted to start with the offer to again, Michael Bocador on behalf of Dairy Cares, the offer to again come in and brief the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, not just on the dairy's efforts to reduce methane in California, but some basic understanding of the types of dairies we have here in the state and how we operate. It's clear to me from listening to these meetings for the last several years that a lot of the questions you have about the GREET model and a lot of the misconceptions that EJAC has as it relates to how dairies operate in the state is a result of just a flawed understanding of how dairies do operate in California. Let me give you 2 examples. Dr. Grupa White talked about how dairies are converting from dry scrape to flush just so they can earn methane credits. That is not allowed under the California GREET model, and a dairy that is dry scrapes baseline would be too small to likely permit the ability to add a digester and create significant methane reductions from that. The GREET model looks at every dairy individually based on the operations that are in place here in the state. So there's no assumptions being made and no conversions being made. So that's a very significant misconception that you continue to have. And then secondly, we continue to hear the concern that flush dairies are wasting water. Again, nothing could be more false. Dairies capture the flush water and use it as irrigation or fertigation with the nutrients that are in the water supply to grow their feed crops. So the water is being recycled for purposes of irrigation and not being wasted. These are misconceptions that could easily be corrected if you would allow us to come in, share our, answer your questions and share a little bit of the story that is, that California dairies are doing a great job of reducing methane in California, and we're leading the world. And I know that's frustrating for some of you that want to just get rid of dairies, but it's the reality. And I would encourage you to allow us to come in, answer all your questions, and provide an overview of what's really happening on California dairies in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next person in queue is the original. We've unmuted your line. You can speak.
I love this lady.
Yeah, so I just think it's so sad because everything that we're doing is literally based upon lies. So, as long as you guys can control, information, then you feel like you can control the truth and we can hijack reality and manipulate it and make people so scared. It's just like the, invisible killer dots called COVID that, we're sitting here and you're fear mongering people, making them believe that we have to get into this new way of life, incentivizing, de-incentivizing. And because if the truth comes out, then the agenda falls flat. And of course, we want the planet to be, running smoothly. It's self-healing, and you won't even recognize like chemtrails that are spraying black carbon on people, and way more than that. A bunch of heavy metals and things that are like nanothermite that are because they're so tiny, they are highly flammable. And then we want to get people into lithium cars, which are lithium bombs, and put them in all of this kind of transportation because we have to save the planet when none of it saves the planet. None of it does that. And we're willing to risk life and make people suffer because it costs more to save the planet per se. And we're spending all this money to save the planet all while people suffer. There are people that can't even feed themselves. And then we're giving people sewer water because it's the only way to give them pure water. Like, this is so sad that we're like, and I don't know if you guys just believe it so badly, because I understand if you actually do and you want to save the planet, but it's like no matter how much data that we use, it can all be fake. And it can all be, it's just like a PCR test. As long as you have a little bit of something, it will show a lot of it. And that's what's going on, is like we're feeding people all of this misinformation so that we get them to comply with it. And you understand that's a UN globalist agenda. Like, they don't care about people. They want to depopulate because you reduce carbon and you reduce human life. Everything that is living is carbon based. And so the more we sit here and we want to do these things, like, I hope that you can look in the mirror and ask yourself if you're doing the right thing. Because like, I don't want to meet our maker one day and have to say that, yes, I perpetuated all the lies and told people all of this stuff just so they would be so fearful, so they would comply and capitulate with anything that we say. Because it's about control. It has nothing to do about saving the planet, because people wouldn't be suffering just so that we can save the planet and save like butterflies. So we give people sewer water, we give them their own sewage,
Excuse
we
me.
make them bathe in it.
Your time is up. Thank you so much.
You are the only one that told me that. Everybody else got to go for as long as they wanted. So see, it just shows like you guys can't handle the truth, and that's what's so sad. The people deserve it. And if you're not willing to do it, then other people should have the opportunity to give a different view, because it shouldn't be all just groupthink. It shouldn't be like, yeah, let's just all be in lockstep. It should be, you should be able to have a conversation about things when it is dire. And we shouldn't be risking human life and making them suffer just to save a planet that can heal itself if we just left it alone. Just like people, we can heal ourselves if we're not sitting there and injecting ourselves with toxins or having it be
I'm just checking the queue to make sure we don't have any other commenters. So one moment. We do have one more raised hand. Jay Whitcover, your line has been unmuted and you can now begin to speak.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake. I did not have anything to add.
Nope, no problem. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I am not seeing any more raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Ashley. So that will then conclude our public comment period for today's meeting. And now I'd like to pass it back to Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, Martine. So our last item on the agenda was a quick item to let EJAC committee members know to be anticipating a survey so that we can establish a calendar for 2024 meeting dates. What we would particularly be looking for from you all are flags for dates that we should avoid, especially because we'll need a quorum to be able to hold our meeting. And also we have asked CARB staff if they can give us a regulatory calendar for 2024 that at least has quarters of when the different regulations may be undertaken and other milestones, so that we can consider and ideally align ourselves with that as we set our 2024 calendar. So this was more of an announcement item, and look out for the survey. We've created an initial list of dates and we'll be circulating those in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'll hand it right back to our co-chairs for any next steps or closing remarks to add at this time.
I'll just quickly reiterate my thanks to all of the work group members and committee members that have put in a lot of time on low carbon fuel standard. Again, we'll take these conversations about the LCFS back to the carbon markets work group. We're also looking forward to a discussion at our November 9th meeting with some researchers that have done analysis of no trade zones. So we'll continue our conversations about the cap and trade regulation, anticipating that that is underway, and looking towards SB 905 implementation early next year as well. So thank you all for being present and walking through all of these important issues with us. And with that, I'll pass it over to Martha, Dina, and Kevin.
Catherine, I think you've said that all for us. I know that the Public Health Work Group didn't meet this time, but we will probably meet again next time. And so we want to make sure if folks have things that they want to bring up or topics, other committee members, please reach out to the co-chairs so that we can make space, because we've got lots of stuff going on, but I know that there's other conversations that we have been wanting to be able to bring to this space. So if you let us know, we can plan for it and put them on the agenda. And with that, Kevin?
I would just say that in our natural working lands, we had a good meeting today. Some interesting conversation came up. I will address some of the issues in the co-chairs meeting, and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks.
So with that, I think we've wrapped our agenda, and we'll look forward to seeing folks again November 9th, starting at 10:30, either in person at Cal EPA headquarters in Sacramento or online via Zoom.